So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's event, which features Dr. Ho's talk on the Cold War, China, and the dollar hegemony. My name is Xian Wang. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Australian Center on China in the World, and I'm the moderator of this talk. So before we get started, we would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australian on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to the elders past and present. Our special speaker today is Professor Ho-fung. He is the Henry M. and Elizabeth P. Wilson Feld Professor in Political Economy in the Department of Sociology and the Nietzsche School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University. He is the current editor-in-chief of the journal Asian Perspective. He is the author of several award-winning and critically acclaimed books, including Protest with Chinese Characteristics, published by Columbia University Press in 2011, The China Boom, Why China Will Not Rule the World, published by Columbia University Press in 2015, City on the Edge, Hong Kong Under Chinese Rule, published by Cambridge University Press in 2022, and Clash of Empires, From Chimerica to the New Cold War, published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. So these publications have been translated into at least 12 different languages. His analysis of the Chinese and global political economy have also been cited in major outlets around the world, such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, and so on. So today, his talk is titled Cold War, China, and the Future of the Dollar Hegemony. Following his talk, we will have around 45 minutes for Q&A. So now please join us to welcome Professor Ho.
Thank you very much, and also I'm honored to be in this beautiful university campus in beautiful weather. And today my talk is about my book in progress, and actually that it doesn't look like particularly about China, but actually it begins with China and ends with China in terms of the narrative and analysis. And it is a book that actually not only the book in progress, but also I have published a number of articles on different parts of the project over the last 10 years. And the impetus for this project is the 2008 global financial crisis, because those are these alternative titles. Why we should need to thank Xi Jinping for the continuation of dollar hegemony. We'll get there. So the beginning of the puzzle is that every once in a while in the last 10-20 years, there's always a lot of talk about the US dollar as a dominant currency that most people trading in, invoicing their trade in, or denominating their foreign exchange reserve in, is going to be over. And then the renminbi, the Chinese currency, is going to take its place. So that is a very, and so there's a different round of this kind of a speculation or discussion. That first, it is, of course, after the 2008 global financial crisis, it is the first time in recent years that people talk about the imminent end of the US dollar hegemony and the rise of the renminbi, at least in the Asia Pacific region. But then it didn't happen in 2010s, but then more recently, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and with all these US sanctions against Russia, there's a talk, like if you read the economies or many other financial press, they all say that US overplay and this kind of sanction cutting Russia, and of course before that is Iran, off the US dollars, the weaponization of the dollar is pushing other people, including China, that is worried to move toward a non-dollar financial system. And as Russia has no choice, but then you start to use renminbi in the trade with China, so they're selling a lot of natural gas to China, getting renminbi, and then the story is that it will increase the international use of renminbi, displacing the role of the China first at the edge and then later in a more major way. And then, like Financial Times, have this kind of chart showing as if it looked like US dollar use is declining ever since 2000 and continuing in recent years, and then the renminbi is rising. So by just looking at the image of the graph, you have a kind of an impression that the renminbi is going to overtake US dollar very soon. But if you look carefully about the graph, it is what people call this chart crime. That is, they manipulate the axis and then the unit of the chart to make it appear to show something that actually the data is not showing, because you see that the use of US dollar, they are measured in the scale on the left. We are talking about dropping from 75% to 60%. But on the renminbi, they're on the scale on the left. We are talking about dropping from 1% to 2%. So it's like still a lot, the big difference. But then they deliberately a lot to make this graphic way to fill the narrative, to support the narrative that the renminbi is going to replace the dollar, and then the US is overpaying its hand by forcing other people to move to the renminbi. So, but then if you put them in the same scale, it is what it looked like. Yeah, the use of dollar has been rising. Have been falling ever since 1970s, and of course, under the Bretton Woods system from 1945 all the way to 1973, the US dollar is backed by gold, with this kind of gold convertibility under the 1 ounce of gold to what is the value of it? But this is constant. That exchange rate between gold and dollar. But then the Nixon abolished the gold backing of the dollar in the early 1970s, and then so the US dollar becomes just a piece of paper without the backing of any precious metal. And after that, so you see this kind of fall of the use of the dollar, and people start to denominate their foreign exchange reserve and also invoice their trade in other currency beside the dollar. But then it bounced back later on, and it stayed in the kind of a level fall below 50%. Now it's around the 60%. And then the next most used currencies actually first the German marks, and then it later become the euro. And after the financial crisis, it dropped because of the trouble in the eurozone. And then you see the Japanese yen, and then the British pound sterling, and the renminbi is here. Actually, it is rising. You hear a story about it's doubling and tripling, but that is from very low base. So it's in single digit. And so it is a big gap. So it is a reality. Not even in Asia, and not even for Chinese exporter. During the financial crisis, at some point, the Jiangsu and Zhejiang government tell their exporter to demand something other than US dollar in the invoice, because right after the global financial crisis, they're not that confident, and then they can take euro. But in the end, that they even don't do euro, and in the end, that they're still mostly receiving US dollar in their export. So it is just another way to look at it. It is the currency international usage index. This one is just like foreign exchange reserve composition around the world. So this is current international usage that take into account both foreign exchange reserve composition and the amount of trade invoice in different currency, plus the kind of ownership of equities, stocks and securities around the world, and what currency they are denominated in. So the Fed, US Fed, then compile an index at this kind of thing together and find that actually US dollar has been quite stable over the last 20 years. And if you have data further back, and then actually it has been that way since the 1980s. So it's a euro, and then the renminbi is definitely appearing into the scene and rising, but actually from a very low base, and still there's a large gap there. So there's a lot of different kind of data. So it is a share of foreign holding of US securities and total financial assets outside the US, and you see that in the global aggregate financial assets around the world, and most of these assets are actually US securities, US Treasury bonds or US stocks, and all kind of properties and securities. So it's up and down, but it's very, very dominating. So it is the puzzle that, despite all the talk about the crisis of the dollar, actually that 1973, when Nixon decided to take the dollar off the backing of the gold, is the first time. It's not actually, people think that it's the first time people talk about the um, uh, the fall of the dollar hegemony, but actually it's before that. It is like Robert Griffiths in 1960, 1961, already writing his book, The Gold and the Dollar Crisis. He already talked about the fact that the dollar is in trouble. It is going to be in crisis. So this guy is very interesting, Charles Kinderberger. So he made this remark in 1970s and saying that the dollar is finished as an international money. And it is important because this guy is the founding father of the dollar hegemony. So recently there's a book called Dollar and Empire. Actually, it's an intellectual biography of this guy. So this guy is very interesting, and if you're interested, actually there's can be a kind of a whole range of research about him because he's one of the architects of the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. And then he also argued against Keynes because Keynes is like the intellectual leader of the Bretton Woods system, is against having one single national currency as the basis of the global financial system because they think that whoever doing this currency and use the currency as international currency, they cannot balance the interests of their national economy and the global economy. So in the end, it will very bad. And then Charles Kinderberger back in the 50s, they already say that no, that it is very complicated for this different country to have a kind of currency combination to create a global currency. It's not going to work. You really need to have one single dominant currency to run the world. So that is the US dollar. So he's the kind of a father of the dollar hegemony. But then he's also had an interesting life because he was persecuted in the McCarthy era for being a kind of a communist sympathizer because in 1940s, when he was the OSS officer, which is the predecessor of the CIA, he was stationed in the London office together with another OSS officer at the time, an economist, Paul Swissy, that is the founder of the very left-wing magazine Monthly Review. And then so he's Marxist economist and then being an OSS officer. So after the gig that they still exchange correspondence, and then Paul Swissy stay in London for a while and keep inviting him back to give talk and in one conference about like the crisis of global capitalism, international capitalism, that kind of Marxist thing. And also, of course, that he also got into trouble because when he worked in the State Department, his boss is Harrison White, who is actually persecuted under the McCarthy era, and after he died, and people find the papers in his home and discover and verify that he's actually really a Soviet spy. That in the State Department and Treasury providing the Soviet Union on this policy paper. So he was implicated. He get this security clearance, revoked it, and things like that, and become pure academic in the economic department at MIT. But in the 70s, and he helped engineer the rise of the US dollar system. But then he, in the 70s, said that is over. And so this talk keep coming and coming. And this one, we have this box, blocking this is Marxist look at the dollar crisis. So it's an article written by a Soviet economist in New York Times in 1978. So that imagine in 1978, New York Times will publish an article by a Soviet economist. But at that time, the economist is working in UN. So basically, he's saying that it is the monopoly capitalism is a death knell. In the 70s, oil prices and dollar prices, people running on the dollar and saying that the de-dollarization is happening. People moving toward other currency. We are moving toward a multi-currency system. So the death knell of a dollar we can all hear. So it's very interesting. All this prediction about the death of the dollar hegemony, all the way to the 60s, to the 70s, and more recently after the global financial crisis, and more recently after the US sanctions on Russia over Ukraine and Iran and things like that. So despite all this prediction, it didn't happen. So and the equivalent question is that why renminbi is more dominant than it is actually now. So it is the puzzle. Despite all the media talk about renminbi replacing the dollar, it is not happening, even not in the Asia Pacific region yet. So we need to figure out whether it is still possible that it will happen. Because I always say that the story about crying wolf, the moral is not that people no longer believe in you. The story is that the wolf eventually will come, even though it didn't come the first 3 times. It doesn't mean they will never come. It will come. So when and under what condition that the dollar hegemony will be actually over, even though in the previous decades of prediction it never happened, but then it's still possible under one condition. It will happen. So and of course, and in Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chair in the 1980s, and then in 2000, around 2000, he already talked about the peso. That there was a great irony that people were more willing to hold dollars that were not backed by gold than they were willing to hold dollars that were backed by gold. Meaning that actually that the usage of dollar is more popular nowadays when the dollar is no longer backed by gold than in the gold standard era in the 50s and 60s when dollar is backed by gold. So everybody's for peso, even Paul Volcker is puzzled about it, that he's supposed to know everything about national and global monetary system, but he openly acknowledged that there's a puzzle. So I will try to compress and skip the theoretical perspective part that, but if you're interested in discussing more, because there's all this kind of course the economists has their theory about money, and the political scientists and sociologists also have their theory about money. The common sense take on money is that money is backed by precious metal and measured by the value, and then after you're taking your money off, and it is like Marx in the classical political economy work in the 19th century, basically saying that money is backed by gold, and then gold value is defined by the kind of labor you get into mining, digging, prospecting of gold. So it is a labor theory of value of money as well. So it is very stable, but then you can explain then what money is after it's no longer backed by gold, just a piece of paper. You cannot theorize and what does this value come from. And actually, in recent years, people discover Weber, for example. We know about Max Weber talking about religion and capitalism, but actually in the later years, in the last few years of his life, and he gave a lot of lectures about general economic history, which is very different theories of capitalism, which is not so much focused on religion, but focused on state power and institutions and all that. And interestingly, that this general economic history after Weber died, it was published by his student, his lecture notes, and then was translated into English in the 1930s by Frank Knight. Frank Knight is the founding father of the new classical economics, the dissertation supervisor of Milton Friedman, actually. But then in the beginning of the Chicago school, they're very historical and institutional, and then they are interested in this Weber, who emphasized the state power and institution. And then there's some discussion about money. And basically is following the work of that is Weber contemporary, George Locke, the state theory of money. Basically, so it is Weber contemporary. He's also German, and basically he talked about the fact that money value comes from state power. The state, through the taxation power, they can make any materials or anything money by saying that you have to pay tax in that particular stuff. You can declare that you have to pay tax in cat poop, for example, and then cat poop will become a currency. Because you have to scramble to get a hold of enough cat poop, and then the people start to sell their stuff in cat poop and stuff like that. So it is what he's saying. So they print a piece of paper and then coupon, and saying that you have to pay tax in this particular coupon with my stamp on it and whatever, and then people will start to scramble to work to get a hold of enough coupon to pay tax. So it is basically the state power is the origins of money, political power. And so there's a lot of there's more recent sociology in Cambridge talking about this state theory of money. And actually that is the anthropologist that who died very young, and his bestseller book published after the global financial crisis is very interesting. Also, actually, from this tradition about this political power, state power, origins of money, because this book is not about them, it's particularly about money. That the first 5,000 years by David Graeber, he's basically saying that that is the kind of foundation of any human society. So he's an anthropologist, a historical anthropologist, because like before it was monetarized, we have our society because we have reciprocity. We owe each other thing. I help you with this thing, and then you help me with another thing. So it is this reciprocity that create society and make society possible. So it is very fundamental to society. So what happened with modern capitalism and modern state is that they try to monetize this human relation and with money, and then through the process that I talk about the state through taxation, saying that and then debts suddenly start to be measured in the money that the state dictates that you have to pay tax with. And then the commercial economy markets start to happen, money transaction and trading in that particular money happen. So all this kind of a tradition. Now it is like there's a heterodox economic school called the MMT, modern money theory, that is in the US and now in the global south, and it become very popular. I don't have time to get into that, but all this kind of a state power as origins of money values is very popular. But they are all focusing on national economy. Not yet people talk about global money, world money, like the US dollar. But then actually global political science and IR people, critical political scientists start to use this perspective to talk about the origins of the US dollar. Is it political power, US global political power? But then my intervention into this argument is that it's too weak. First, US political power is actually also in decline. Because in the past, people just assume that people use US dollar because we have the strongest economy, biggest economy, most innovative economy. But then we realize that US is heavily indebted. US is also economically as a weight, share of the global economy is also declining. And why the US economic share of the global economies keep declining, but then the use of the dollar is still constant. So it's not about economic. And then a group of people talk about it's coming from US political power. But the problem is that US political power, however you measure, is also in decline. So in the end, you don't quite have a satisfactory explanation about the sticking power, the staying power of the US dollar and Germany. Then my intervention is that is one particular form of political power, not political power in general, that the US and the world that give the US dollar the hegemonic status, which is the military power is the key. So it's tied to the US war machine, actually, that is mutually constitutive, because people keep saying that, oh, US is heavily indebted, more in debt than many Latin American countries during the debt crisis, so US is good. But then people miss the point that Latin American country, when they're heavily in debt, they are heavily in debt in other people's currency, which is US dollar. So you cannot create from thin air US dollar to repay their debt. You need to sell stuff in the international market to get the dollars. Is why that they are in during the debt crisis, they are in crisis. They need to pursue austerity and all kind of measure to come up with enough US dollar to pay the debt. So it's why the debt crisis. But then US is the only country that it can like borrow in its own currency. So theoretically, they cannot went broke. They cannot default the debt because no matter how much they owe, that they can just print the dollar to repay the debt. So because all the debt US always in US dollar. So it is the kind of advantage as the French, not de Gaulle, but one of the prime minister under de Gaulle in the 60s and 70s, and say that it is exorbitant privilege of the US that everybody is using the US dollar, because it enable the US to not only live beyond its means, but also have a budget deficit that's much bigger than everybody without getting into major financial monetary crisis, and have a big outsized military that in certain other ordinary circumstances other country cannot afford, because they can keep borrowing from the world and support the deficit, and then build the military apparatus, and then it is mutually constitutive because this military apparatus also help sustain the dollar in Germany. So this first, I go back to history to look at these episodes of this different episode of dollar crisis, and look at uh, uh, how in the end this dollar crisis was resolved by military means. The first dollar crisis is when Robert Griffin is talking about the dollar crisis in the late 1950s and 1960s, because at that time people think that the dollar is backed by gold, so it's a constant gold exchange rate, and people believe in dollar because it is this promise of so this 1 ounce of gold, $35. So under Bretton Woods, they promise that you hold the dollar. Dollar is gold, and whenever you come to the Federal Reserve and tell other central bank with dollar, I can trade the dollar with gold under the constant rate of 1 ounce of gold to $35. But actually, that people just believe that or assume that the US dollar is backed by gold until Nixon abolished the gold standard. But it is not true. Because US never have enough gold to back all the dollar that is circulating. It's just like bank that they never have the deposit. They never have the real cash money to support all the deposits that people have. If everybody try to like cash out at once, that any bank can collapse. The thing is that you prevent that from happening. So US never have the enough gold for all the dollar is pumping out to the world. But during the late 1950s, when US got into the so-called Eisenhower recession, and then Germany and also Japan already recovered from the war, West Germany at that time, and then start to have trade surplus with the US. US starting to have trade deficit. So people, particularly West German government, start to lose confidence in the US dollar. They suspect in the end that they might not be able to hold up the 1 ounce of gold to $35 US dollar pledge. So actually the West German government and other European government start to really cash in the US dollar for gold. And there's a kind of an emerging kind of a bank run kind of situation at that time. And then the US at that time is why that they start to talk about the dollar crisis. They keep coming to cash in that it is going to collapse. The whole system cannot hold up and things like that. And then the US is resorting to blackmail. Actually, it's fascinating that we talk about the fact that Donald Trump during the campaign and now is talking about that Europe should pay up more. Then if you don't pay up, US is not going to keep paying for your security. If you don't pay up, that I let the Russians do whatever they want. So it's exactly like raise people's eyebrows and offend so many people. But actually, this is the kind of rhetoric that even JFK is talking to the West German, but not in open. There's, you look at the kind of a declassified secret statement and letter that JFK sent to the West German government is doing exactly the same thing. On one hand, they pump a lot of dollar to support the Cold War front. So like Radio Free Europe, now Trump acts saying that it's served the purpose, but then after the Marshall Plan, they pour a lot of money for this propaganda machinery and Radio Free Asia and all this kind of thing. So US is pumping US dollar into the German economy, and of course, then the other sticky thing is US troops stationed in West Germany. It has the largest troops that is stationed because they fear that the Soviet bloc will invade. And then at that time, after the basic goal in West Germany, that West Germany become a fully sovereign country after the occupation of the Allied force, all the troops that they cannot ask the West German to actually pay the troops because it will look like a real colonial occupying force. So it's politically unacceptable. So it's US that's footing the bill and paying for the US troop stationed in West Germany to show it as a kind of a solidarity and generosity and helping the US ally to fend off Soviet Union. But at the same time, when late 1950s, when the West German government having an increasing trade deficit, surplus with the US, and then the US become very concerned about this kind of cost of keeping troops in West Germany, and then there's the offset agreement that first Eisenhower and then the JFK government negotiated with the West German government. So I'm not going to tell you to pay for troops here because it will look bad on the part of the US. So, but then we have an agreement. There are two parts. One part is that no matter how much money we spend on the troops that we stationed in West Germany, then West German government will promise that you will spend the same amount of money to buy US weapons, US equipment, and all kind of US supplies. So to offset the kind of a trade deficit that US have with Germany created by this kind of a security situation of US defending West Germany. And the second condition is that West Germany promised stop cashing in your US dollar for gold. Keep your US dollar and believe it is good. So these two part of the agreement, and then after a while that JFK is complaining. So it is all this kind of in the presidential library that they put all the thing online. It's very interesting statement. So that the West Germany is not kind of abiding by this, like the offset agreement. They're buying not enough US weapons to offset the US money spent on the West German troops, and then things like that. And then JFK get angry and saying that we have a lot of colleagues in Congress saying that actually it is not the US interest to help defend West Germany. If you keep us like spending all this money, that many of our colleagues in the Congress will actually don't care that you become communists. So basically, it is exactly what Trump telling the European openly. But then at that time, JFK is talking about free world and we are in solidarity, we never abandon you. It is in the middle of Berlin crisis, actually. That is very dire time. But in secret, they are already blackmailing West Germany to pay up and then close the gap and then stop cashing in the dollar for gold to defend the international confidence in the US dollar. And at the same time, of course, there's also other problem that the France and the British are not very happy about it because the West Germans used to buy a lot of weapons from the UK and France. If the US bullied West Germany to buy US weapons instead, meaning that their purchase of UK and French weapons is fewer. But then this is all kind of a situation, but it was resolved in the end that the offset that Germany paid US still cannot cover the US spending on the troops in West Germany, but then in the end that Germany really stopped cashing in the dollar for gold. So it's just like how you stop a bank run, like China nowadays try to stop some of the bank runs, that you put a guard in front of the bank and stop people from cashing in. Then the bank run is stopped. And so it is exactly how they do it, using this kind of a security blackmail to save the dollar from the prices. And actually this offset agreement then become a template for all these security agreement that US has with South Korea, with Japan. They always have this kind of security pact, always have a kind of a special section on the offset that US paying all the troops and all the military the base. At the same time, your government will agree to offset our expenditure with purchase of US products, US equipment, and even hiring US contractor to do some constructions and related to base and stuff like that. So it's always like that. And so it's a template, become the template of all these kind of security pact US have with other countries. And another crisis, of course, that is the petrodollar. That is in 73, when the Saudi Arabia and other Arab country oil producers is doing oil embargo on the US in support of the Palestinian cause and the Arab nation against Israel. It created a problem. And first, that is the kind of the oil price increased, and then US was in trouble, and the global oil price increased, and then the Saudi Arabia, when they are exporting oil, they invoice most of their, if not all of their oil in US dollar. But at that time, because 1973, 74, the dollar just off gold. So there's an international confidence problem about the dollar. And the Saudis and other big oil exporter at the time, Iran and other oil exporter in OPEC actually start discussing shifting away from the US dollar to start to invoice oil in other currency, like the Swiss franc or British pound sterling in other currency. And then the Kissinger sent William Simon, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who a Wall Street bond trader, become a U.S. Treasury, and Kissinger actually sent him to strike a deal with the Saudi Arabia government. And there's one part of the deal is open, but then another part of the deal is secret, and until recently, that's declassified it, and there's a Bloomberg story about it, and people write about it, is that the secret part of the argument, the agreement is that Saudi Arabia, despite it's technically in conflict with the US over Israel-Arab conflict, they promised to not to shift away from the US dollar as a kind of invoicing currency of oil, and also use its influence in OPEC to stop any other, the whole group from invoicing the oil in other currency, and also promised to use this dollar, petrodollar that they earn in the oil export to reinvest in US Treasury bonds and also many other things. But of course, then it created all kind of issue because they found that they're actually investing in US defense industry. So in New York Times, there's all about this Arab scare, Muslim scare. They think, okay, Arabs are coming, they are taking over the defense industry in the US with this petrodollar, and also shopping mall, the Arabs stake in America. So this already a kind of a xenophobic kind of, okay, actually, this kind of xenophobism aside, it is actually the design of the deal. That is, they earn dollar and then they power the dollar back into the US for all kind of investment, mostly US treasuries, but also other kind of investment, including in defense industry. And Judith Miller is interesting because like this story in the 70s is when she was young, but when she was older, she wrote a very famous New York Times story about the weapon of mass destruction in Iraq that proven to be false. And then Edward Said like write a long article about this long-term anti-Muslim bias of this person, and then of course he was still disgraces and left New York Times and looking at other things. So it is the petrodollar again that and the deal is that what Kissinger offered Saudi Arabia still stick to continue to use the dollar and then invest in the U.S. Is that the U.S. will allow Saudi Arabia to buy the most advanced weapon system from the U.S. And then the whole Saudi regime rely on the U.S. military support to stay in power regionally and internally. So it is still a sticking point because it's why Saudi Arabia, after this kind of journalist being dismembered, assassinated, killed it in the Turkish embassy, and then Biden make a fuss about it and complain about it, and then the Saudi Arabia talking about, oh, we are going to shift to renminbi in our so the petro yuan that they're talking about. And after they talk about it, and U.S. pay attention, and then the Biden administration toned down the criticism of the regime and sent Anthony Blinken to visit Saudi Arabia and saying that you make sure that two conditions: you don't use Huawei in telecommunications. Second, you don't use renminbi in oil export. Only use the dollar, and then we will send you the most advanced weapon system to you. Continue, and so it is the part of the negotiation. It's with the oil producing countries. It's always like that. So I don't have time to go over all the example, but so actually the petro euro is a kind of a real possibility when the euro start to emerge, because at that time Saddam Hussein under UN embargo after the first Iraq war, that in the 1990s the Saddam Hussein has a deal with France and Germany, saying that France and Germany helped Iraq get rid of the UN embargo, and then when Iraq start to sell oil in the international market again, we'll use euro, not the US dollar. So it is a petro euro prospect. In the end, that is the second Iraq war, that the conspiracy theories always say that the US want to take out Saddam Hussein is to prevent this kind of petro euro from happening. So it's deliberate, but I don't think it is deliberate. There's a lot of factors that determine that US going to the second Iraq war, but then the consequence, unintended a lot, is that actually you see after the second Iraq war, despite all the chaos in Iraq and all the problem in Iraq, and the fact that actually the oil field in Iraq is a large part of them is actually run by Chinese energy company. But it doesn't matter. The whole matter is that Iraq oil export is still totally denominated in US dollar. So it has a lot of petrodollar and power back in the US treasuries. So you look at it is the US treasury holding of different countries, and Iraq is actually what is the year of it? 2023, quite recent. Iraq is holding of US treasuries more than Spain, Italy, and among the top in the Arab world, of course, then Saudi Arabia and UAE still hold a lot. Saudi Arabia is top in this league. So actually, the unintended consequence is that the second Iran war taking out Saddam Hussein is that the country will never happen. So people want to buy oil, you cannot pay in euro, you still need to pay in US dollars. So it's another example about how this military factor was mobilized to defend the primacy of the US dollar. And so I'm going to skip all this. And then you know all the problem about having a US dollar as a national currency of the US to become the global currency. The problem is that US money supply is determined by US internal politics and US economic elite. And then when the supply of the US dollar expand because of domestic factor in the US, that the developing world and all around the world have a good times because there's abundant finance and development of developing countries go up. But then when US need to constrain the US dollar supply because of internal politics, and then the whole world get into trouble. So I don't have time to talk about all this part. But don't have a number to show this correlation. Whenever US contract its supply, the growth rate of developing countries actually decline. When the US expand its dollar supply, then the average growth rate of developing countries also pick up, so that the whole world is at the mercy of US monetary policy, which is determined by US internal politics. And this kind of thing is not just data, and actually they recognize this. Paul Volcker, heavy smoker, 2014, he said that new questions have been raised about the sensitivity of markets is more in emerging economies, so the prospect of even small policy adjustment by the Federal Reserve. So they recognizing it, and many developing countries are complaining about it. So it is why after the global financial crisis, there's a call for de-dollarization. We are fed up. We have enough of it. That you make a mess in the global, create a global financial crisis, and the whole world will suffer. So after 2008, 2009, 2010, there's a huge call for de-dollarization. China is in the forefront in that. Hu Jintao, Hu Jintao 2011 G20 speech, major efforts should be made to reform and improve the international monetary system, international trading system, and commodity pricing mechanism. We should advance the reform of the international monetary system in a steady manner, expand the use of the special drawing right, which is a basket of currency. So at that time, Hu Jintao policy is to push renminbi into that basket of currency, the big five. So now it successfully got into the big five and then increased the use of this special drawing right as a kind of and build an international reserve currency system with stable value, rule-based issuance, and manageable supply. So it is the renminbi internationalization. At first, through renminbi internationalization, more people use renminbi internationally. They successfully push renminbi into the big five currency in the basket of SDR, and at the same time, through increasing the use of SDR as a reserve currency, that increased the use of renminbi in the trading system. So you see this kind of this China Daily, and then Global Times is level sort of this kind of a propaganda cartoon talking about the bad thing about the dollar hegemony, the whole world is cooked by the Uncle Sam, and all this kind of thing. So there's a little sort of this kind of propaganda to call for de-dollarization. But in the end, that you see that so it's as recent as 2024, we already see this. That is another reiteration of this graph. That is the use of renminbi as a straight up international payment. 60% nearly the US dollar, and euro very distant second, and then the renminbi is part of the top five, but actually it's talking about 3.12%. Another kind of visualization of this is it's the same, actually the same. So it's a reserve currency. The US dollar is dominating. Actually, Australian dollar is higher than RMB. And there's a literature about this alternative currency, reserve currency, that after people lost confidence in dollar, there's a movement in recent years to shift to other currency as an alternative currency. But the two biggest currencies that pick up the slack that when people shift away from dollar is Korean won and Australian dollar. Actually, it's very interesting because they have strong macroeconomic fundamental. It's part of the U.S. alliance system, and also better macroeconomic fundamental than the U.S. So now when people are shifting away from the dollar, they don't have much choice, and then this non-conventional reserve currency rising up is still a small percentage compared to euro and US dollar. So actually Canadian dollar, Australian dollar is used more than the RMB as of the first quarter of 2024. And then the question is why? That fundamentally that China, even though the economy is in trouble, but then still a second biggest economy and there are a lot of trade and the biggest trading nation, counting export, adding import together than the US. So its currency theoretically used to be widely used, but in the end that it wasn't. One reason, of course, is the kind of a problem of the convertibility that China has one of the actually the most closed financial system. The RMB is not convertible freely. So it is just given the indicator to show this that the capital control is very severe in China. Of course, they keep Hong Kong as an offshore financial hub, but then the mainland China onshore financial system is closed. So it's keeping it, so this kind of a lack of convertibility is stopping people from using the RMB instead of the USD, except the fact that the Chinese government is trying to promote it very hard. One example is this Russia under sanction. Then with the help of AI and translation, I'm reading all this Russian central bank report and Russian news report that is available. And it's very interesting that in the report they keep saying that we are exporting gas and oil and products to China and then receiving RMB. But then this RMB is inconvertible. So when I want to buy military supply from Turkey, India, UAE, and then they still need dollars. So in the end, we still need to find some way to turn this RMB into the US dollar to actually buy what we actually need. In my talk yesterday, of course, we talked about the fact that actually Hong Kong is a common place for them to turn this US dollar RMB that they earn from trading with China into what in this particular central bank report saying that is he said there's a statement, a sentence saying that inevitably we still need to use the currency of the enemy. So the problem is we have a lot of RMB and then we need to find some way to trade it for the currency of the enemy and then to use it to buy stuff with it. And then it is another example. It is like the Wagner Group. When Helsinki that for a part with Putin raid the Wagner Group headquarters in St. Petersburg and then find a pile of US dollars. So meaning that the mercenaries, the Wagner Group is paying people in the US dollar. You don't see RMB there when they raid the office. So meaning that this convertibility is a big thing. That the problem of RMB is that it is not freely convertible, and the reason why it's not freely convertible is that despite after the WTO trying to access in the WTO about the promise of financial liberalization, the Chinese government is very, very reluctant to liberalize the financial market and open up the capital account because they think that it is economic security issues. They fear foreign banks will come in and not only take over our financial system, but more important that they fear that when the enterprise and individuals and local government can borrow money from foreign banks, then they will be the Chinese government will lose the leverage of control about this actor. So this control of credit is very important. So it is one reason that why they're keeping the RMB inconvertible. So far as inconvertible, even Russians have a power of RMB that they still need to turn it into US dollar. before it can be used for something that used. That this guy is not Mr. Bean, and look like Mr. Bean somehow, but he is the deputy governor of Bank of Russia in 2023 in Duma. He made this remark and saying that China does not welcome the circulation of cash yuan abroad, and Russia can't get Chinese yuan in cash. They don't exist and won't exist, meaning that whatever the Russian earn by selling stuff to China, so it's not like really have pile of cash RMB or like transfer to be in the Russian bank, but actually the earning in RMB is actually exists in the form of a bank account statement in the Bank of China in China. So they cannot hold the RMB outside. Not only that it is inconvertible, but also it has to be kept in the China bank. So they feel very insecure, and then they find all the way they can to change its the RMB into US dollar, and then the Hong Kong is the key, as I talked about in more detail yesterday in yesterday talk. So the issue is, but beside the inconvertibility problem of the RMB, actually the RMB is already kind of a serious challenge to the potential of US dollar, because I'm having this, I'm skipping a lot of this, but then you look at, I remember the first part of the talk, I talked about the fact that US is using this military power to secure the use of the dollar, to make sure that everybody dependent on US security and protection will use the dollar and nothing else. And every time when there's a crisis of the dollar, US will mobilize the military apparatus and the security umbrella to blackmail its allies to stay with the dollar. So it is happening all the time because all the major competing capitalist economy and resource commodity exporter from West Germany during Cold War, and of course Japan as well. That is a kind of a side story that when the US and Japan is negotiating the Pasa Accord to realign the currency in the mid-1980s, that the security protection of the US over Japan, because at that time there was like a North Korea just shoot down on paying, and then Japan is very nervous about North Korea and scramble to get US continuous support of Japan's security. So it is on the table that they might explicitly use this security card to make sure that Japan will do whatever US told them to do in terms of monetary policy. So that this is this kind of situation that all major competitor and challenger to US as a capitalist economies, from West Germany, Japan, and later of course like Saudi Arabia as an oil producer, they're all under US military umbrella. So I construct an index of countries that have a lot of US troops. I measure the number of troops in different countries, and also how much weapon they buy from the US to construct a military dependence index for all countries. And find that actually so this top 20 US military dependence, and then so this is a kind of the holding or percentage of holding share of US securities overseas held in US military dependence, so that you see that a lot of this kind of most of the US treasuries and other kind of US asset denominated US dollar is up until very recently, they are mostly held by the countries that is totally dependent on US in security, with some offshore financial center, and China coming into the picture, and then it's shrink again, and also the offshore financial center. But now that the countries that is dependent on the US in security no longer hold the majority of the US dollar assets. And then these other parts, other entities that hold US dollar assets are China, and then it's kind of an offshore financial center. And then it's very secretive, offshore financial center. Who are they? But then actually that is this kind of a Panama paper. There's a lot of this kind of leaks of account information of this kind of offshore financial center over the years. So the data is as good as 2014. And then they have a publicly available database, and then they have this address of this account holder in this offshore financial center. And then you count the address that actually that China constitutes the majority of this address of holding offshore financial account in Cayman Island, British Virgin Island, Bahamas, all these places. And of course, there's Hong Kong as well, and US, of course, that have a lot of people for tax evasion, all kind of reasons, and other countries. But China is big. So actually, a lot of this kind of offshore financial center holding of US asset is actually China holding. And then there are two particular examples, one in Luxembourg and one in Belgium. There are all these kind of financial firms that is known, publicly known, that they are actually doing US Treasury trading for the Chinese government. So this kind of a US Treasury holding, it didn't show up in the US Treasury foreign holding of US Treasury data, in the US Treasuries. And they show up as a Belgian holding or Luxembourg holding, but actually they are China holding, but then the Luxembourg and Belgium firms hold it and sell it and trade it on behalf of the Chinese government. So that's like the big picture is that it used to be that US dollar hegemony is backed by the fact that all major capitalist challenger, the capitalist economy that is capable of challenging the US dominance in economics are military security, in terms of security, dependent on the US, but no longer. So it is opened up kind of a possibility of a new power, namely China. China is the first in recent history major capitalist power that can challenge the US economically, that is not within the US security umbrella. So US can not blackmail China like they did to West Germany, to Japan, and Saudi Arabia, using the military umbrella to force them to support the US dollar. So China is potentially a real challenger at China's currency. Or even China might not even like promote its currency at the expense of US dollar. They can just use more euro, for example, instead of US dollar. It can still do the work of undermining US hegemony. So China is in the position to challenge US dollar hegemony. But the last thing that prevents China from actually capable of doing it is the inconvertibility of the RMB. Even Russia has trouble that you have power of RMB, that you go to different places, you cannot buy things with this RMB. It's not convertible yet. And then why the RMB is not convertible is because of political consideration of the CCP. That is why the subtitle, the hidden title of the paper is that of the talk is that we need to thank Xi Jinping for the continuation of the US dollar hegemony. We can imagine a scenario in which I don't have, so it is the fine grained data. So that actually that's the 1994. So the top 20 countries holding most US securities, all the shaded countries that among these top holder of US dollar assets are within the US or are also the top country that is most militarily dependent on the US with this other offshore financial center. So it is the situation of 1994, but it's no longer now. So you see among the top 20 countries that hold most US dollar denominated financial assets, now is not the majority that are militarily dependent on the US. That militarily dependent on the US, but you have China, you have other offshore financial. Well, Taiwan is like dependent or not dependent, because in terms of troops, in terms of weapon, it's not among the top 20 compared to United Kingdom and Japan, but it is still part of the US military umbrella. But besides that, there are the places that actually is not outside the direct control of the US military umbrella, that they cannot blackmail them into supporting the dollar. So the possible scenario is that so it is the thing that we just talked about. 2023, Blinken go to Saudi Arabia to talk about the fact that assurance from Saudi Arabia, it won't allow China to build military base in the kingdom. And also the Biden administration and United Arab negotiator could also seek limitation of Saudi Arabia using technology developed by China's Huawei, and assurance that Saudi Arabia will use US dollar or Chinese currency to price oil sell. So it's 2023. So it's very explicit. So this the couple scenarios. One is that if suddenly China really becoming committed to liberalize the financial system and make the government be freely convertible, that they keep saying that they're doing since China associated the WTO, but keep delaying doing it because of political risks that they fear. But in the end, if they really do it, that I can expect that a lot of countries, at least in Asia Pacific, will shift to the renminbi to trade. When the renminbi is fully convertible, and actually with the expectation of this going to happen in 2010, it's all this kind of Wall Street Bank, British Bank, including HSBC. You look at their report that they're already talking about it. That they are welcoming the renminbi internationalization, and so they're getting ready for it to do a lot of renminbi business. So that they are getting ready back in 2010, and after the global financial crisis and the US was in trouble, that getting ready into this eventuality that when just like when the British pound sterling was declining in the 1950s and US dollar replaced it, the British bank in London already all shift to doing US dollar business rather than the British sterling business. So it's why there's the euro dollar market in London. London becoming an offshore financial center for US dollar trading. So the British bank was not hurt by the decline of the British pound sterling because they already shift to US dollar business. So actually they were preparing for that in 2010s, that they prepared for the fall of the US dollar and rise of the renminbi. So it is why at that time many Wall Street financial firms has started to try to expand aggressively in Hong Kong as a kind of offshore renminbi center, British bank, and they're all getting ready to turning Hong Kong into this kind of offshore renminbi financial center, just like the London. But it didn't happen because after the 2015 mini financial crash, Xi Jinping basically put renminbi internationalization at the back burner and tighten capital control, prevent capital flight, and further delay the convertibility transformation of the renminbi and liberalization of the financial system. But eventually, imagine if there's a world in which they suddenly don't worry about the political risks, or there's a regime change. Actually, my theory is that so far as the CCP is in power, they are not going to do it. So I'm telling people that if you really want the regime change in China, that be careful for what you wish for from a US perspective. It is what happened to South Korea and Taiwan. They liberalized the financial system and open up the capital account after they democratized. And in the end, then South Korea will become one of the alternative non-conventional currency. And then it can happen in China in one way or other, and then at least in Asia, then the US dollar and Germany will be over. So let me stop here and then talk about this possible scenario that might not happen and will not happen so that the CCP is in control. So we have to thank Xi Jinping and the CCP for the continuous dollar hegemony. But besides this scenario, that at least in the short and intermediate term, I don't see any alternative scenario. Let me stop here and look forward to your questions and comments and the discussion. Thank you.